Chapter 72. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Yi glanced over at her after hearing what she said. Zhou Kur, worried he'd think she was a bleeding heart, quickly explained, the snowstorm had just started then. I figured it would blow over. Zhang Yi smiled, unconvinced. He put his phone on the table and steepled his fingers. That's not the issue. The supplies you gave her should have been gone ages ago. How'd she even make it this long? Zhou Kur, still gnawing on a rib, quietly placed it back in her bowl after hearing Zhang Yi's question. Lin Xiaohu died almost 10 days ago from lack of medicine. Zhang Yi nodded. Makes sense, I guess. He suddenly chuckled. Lin Chuanxia always said Lin Xiaohu was her precious, she wanted to keep him in her mouth. Looks like she got her wish. Zhou Kur gasped and playfully glared at Zhang Yi. I'm eating. Ha ha ha. Pleased with his joke, Zhang Yi burst out laughing. He suddenly realized having a woman around was way more fun, at least someone would keep things from getting boring. Just then, a shout echoed from outside. They both turned to look out the window. About 40 meters away, on the balcony of Building 25, a naked man was standing, arms raised, shouting into the wind. Then, as they watched, he dove off the balcony. Zhou Kur frowned, sighing, when will this snowpocalypse ever end? In times like these, plenty of people choose suicide when they lose all hope. Zhang Yi shook his head. Who knows? Mother Nature's way beyond what our tech can figure out right now. Just gotta keep living, I guess. As they were talking, Zhang Yi's phone rang. He checked the caller ID. It was Uncle Yu, the security guard from his past life. Zhang Yi only trusted two people, Uncle Yu and Zhou Kur. They both sacrificed for others, sticking to their moral code until the very end. That's why he let Zhou Kur into his home as his servant. Uncle Yu hoarded the second most supplies in the building, after Zhang Yi himself. His stash was still pretty solid, a single guy in his 40s, no kids, working as a security guard. To save money, he always stocked up on cheap instant noodles and ham. Zhang Yi answered the phone. Hey, Uncle Yu. Zhang Yi, you doing okay? Uncle Yu stuttered, smiling awkwardly. Zhang Yi had known him for years. He knew that kind of tone meant Uncle Yu wanted something. Zhang Yi considered it. If Uncle Yu needed supplies, he could spare some. The former soldier was pretty skilled. He could be useful down the line, take a bullet or something, so Zhang Yi was happy to do him a favor. I'm doing alright, Uncle Yu. Just got more mouths to feed, so supplies are going faster. He glanced at Zhou Kur. Zhou Kur blushed and looked down, picking at her rice. Oh, yeah, that's a problem. More people, more food. Right. Uncle Yu's voice faded, sounding embarrassed, but after a pause, he finally said, Zhang Yi, I need to ask you something. Uncle Yu, no need to be formal. Just ask. If I can help, I will. Uncle Yu said awkwardly, well, Xia Limei's daughter, Tang Bao, has a fever, and I don't have any medicine. She's burning up, and her mom and I are freaking out. Do you have any medicine? His voice trembled with worry and pleading. Zhang Yi's eyes widened. Wow, Xia Limei landed Uncle Yu. That woman had game. Out of all the single guys in the building, she managed to snag the next best provider after Zhang Yi. But thinking about Xia Limei's situation in his previous life, Zhang Yi was no longer surprised. She looked pitiful, but she outlived Zhang Yi, so she wasn't as innocent as she seemed. Xia Limei was under 30, and a solid 6. Uncle Yu couldn't resist the mature woman. Zhang Yi wasn't going to interfere. If Xia Limei could convince a simp to raise her kid, that was her business. Zhang Yi said, oh, congrats, Uncle Yu. Uncle Yu was flustered. Congrats. We're just living together. You know how it is, if it weren't for the snowstorm, I wouldn't be able to find a wife. Zhang Yi said, I've got a few boxes of medicine here. Come get them later. Zhang Yi's tone was casual, but a few boxes sent a clear message. He was running low on fever reducers, and yet, during this crisis, he was giving them to Uncle Yu. Think about that. How generous was Zhang Yi being? Wouldn't you owe him big time for that? Sure enough, Uncle Yu was speechless with gratitude. Zhang Yi, how can I ever thank you? You've helped me twice now. Yu Jiguang, swear right here, right now, if you ever need anything, I'll be there, come hell or high water. Uncle Yu swore passionately. Zhang Yi chuckled. Come on, Uncle Yu, we go way back. I think of you like my own uncle. No need for the formalities. Come get the medicine ASAP. Zhou Kuo mumbled from across the table, glancing at Zhang Yi mischievously and sticking her tongue out. She was just now realizing how cunning Zhang Yi could be beneath his stoic facade. Zhang Yi slipped his foot out of his slipper and rubbed her black silk-covered leg under the table, applying more pressure. Suddenly, her legs felt weak, and she almost collapsed on the table. Just when she thought Zhang Yi was going to add another meal, Zhang Yi calmly stood up and left the table. Zhou Kuo, annoyed, lightly slapped the table. Arsonist, that she cursed under her breath, her face burning red. Chapter 73 The Scheming Mother. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After a bit, Zhang Yi heard a knock. It was Uncle Yu's voice. Zhang Yi, it's Yu Jiguang. You home? Zhang Yi glanced at the monitor, then frowned. Uncle Yu wasn't alone, a woman holding a kid was with him. Though bundled up in a puffy coat, Zhang Yi recognized her as Xiaolime, the precious mother. What's she doing here? Zhang Yi liked Uncle Yu well enough, but he wasn't friends with Xiaolime, and based on his past life, he always thought she was a piece of work. Zhang Yi got up and went to the door. Zhou Kuo just glanced at him, letting it go. Zhang Yi was the boss in this house. Zhang Yi stopped at the door, not opening it. Uncle Yu? He asked, knowing the answer. Yeah, it's me, Uncle Yu replied. Then Xiaolime piped up, Zhang Yi, Tang Bao has a fever. Please, can you help us? Her voice was choked with tears. Zhang Yi grabbed the acetaminophen suspension and children's cold medicine he'd stocked up on and tossed them through the peephole. Get that kid medicated, pronto. Catching something now is no joke. Uncle Yu snatched up the medicine, his eyes gleaming with gratitude. Zhang Yi, thank you so much. Xiaolime took the medicine, and Uncle Yu started to lead her away, but a strange glint came into her eyes. Zhang Yi, I need a favor. Could the baby stay at your place for a little while? You've got heat in there, right? Our place is freezing. The baby's sick, and I'm afraid she'll get worse. Can you help us out? Uncle Yu froze, surprised. Xiaolime hadn't mentioned this on the way over. He felt embarrassed, realizing he hadn't run this by Zhang Yi first. Now, Xiaolime was springing this on him, putting him on the spot. But seeing Xiaolime's pleading eyes, he didn't know what to say. Inside, Zhang Yi smirked when he heard Xiaolime's request. Give an inch, take a mile, huh? Sorry, Sister Xie, can't let anyone in right now. And honestly, our coal's almost gone. It's barely warmer in here than outside. Zhang Yi wasn't buying it. Xiaolime was saying it was for the kid, but neither he nor Zhou Kuo knew the first thing about taking care of a baby, and even if they did, he wouldn't lift a finger once the kid was inside. Xiaolime would use caring for her as an excuse to move into, easy come, easy go, his foot. If she had ulterior motives, Zhang Yi would have to be on guard 24/7, no thanks. Hearing Zhang Yi, Uncle Yu also quietly told Xiaolime, Zhang Yi's already been great to us, even giving us medicine. Let's go home and bundle her up. She'll be fine. Xiaolime wiped her eyes and said in a whimper, what do you know? She's just a baby, so delicate. She called to Zhang Yi, I know this is a lot to ask, but I don't know what else to do. I know you're a good guy, that's why I dared to ask. Please, for the baby's sake, and for you's sake, let her stay for a while. Now she was dragging Uncle Yu into it. Most people would cave under that kind of pressure, make a small request, then when the other party agrees, they'll be ashamed to say no to the bigger one. The woman was definitely playing games. Xiaolime hadn't told Uncle Yu her plan, waiting until Zhang Yi gave them the medicine before dropping the bomb. But she underestimated how cold-hearted Zhang Yi could be. He stood by the door, arms crossed. Sister Xie, if this was before all hell broke loose, I'd say yes in a heartbeat. But you know how it is now. People in this building are trying to rob me and kill me. I'm too scared to let strangers in. You get it, right? Uncle you gets it, right? Uncle you nodded, flustered. He was mortified to be stuck in the middle, but given how grateful he felt to Zhang Yi, he didn't want to keep pushing. Yeah, Zhang Yi's done enough for us. Who else would give us medicine? You know how hard it is to get now. Xia Mei bit her lip, not arguing with Uncle Yu, but her eyes were red and she looked pitiful. But he let Zhou Kur stay there. Zhang Yi smirked and said, Zhou Kur's my girlfriend. Got a problem with that, Zhou Kur, hearing this, knew it was just for show, but she couldn't help smiling. Women cared more about a man's sweet words than the truth, even if she knew it was a lie, she could fool herself into believing it. Xia Mei frowned, considering her words, but Uncle Yu wasn't as thick-skinned. Zhang Yi had helped him so much, he couldn't lose face like this. He pulled Xia Mei away, saying earnestly, let's go, don't make trouble for him. Zhang Yi's done plenty. Don't push it. Seeing Uncle Yu was genuinely upset, Xia Mei's face changed from aggrieved to understanding in a second. Okay, I'm just doing it for the kid. Uncle Yu said to the door, sorry, Zhang Yi. Don't mind her. And thanks again, Zhang Yi replied, no worries. I get it. We're all in this together. Watching on the monitor as Uncle Yu led Xia Mei and the baby downstairs, Zhang Yi went back to the table and said to Zhou Kur, that woman's trouble. Zhou Kur shrugged. Aren't they all? Zhang Yi shrugged. True, but I get along well with Uncle Yu. I'm afraid she'll mess that up. Uncle Yu was exactly the kind of worker Zhang Yi wanted. Zhang Yi didn't want some woman poisoning the well. He made a mental note to be extra wary of Xia Mei. At the very least, she had her eyes on his place and his stuff. Chapter 74. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Uncle Yu got back home with Xia Mei and the baby. Shutting the door behind them, he frowned. What were you saying out there? You can't just ask anyone to watch the kid. It's a madhouse out there. You don't know who's friend or foe. If he'd give the baby medicine, that says he's someone we can trust. Why are you always so contrary? Xia Mei sat on the bed, cradling the baby, and unbuttoned her blouse, giving him the medicine mixed with her milk. She didn't argue with Uncle Yu, just said, her voice weak, isn't it all for the baby? You know she's the only reason I'm still going. If something happens to her, what's the point of me even being alive? Tears started streaming down her face. Uncle Yu looked over and saw her exposed breast, and his heart softened but also hardened. He lowered his voice, hey, I get what you're saying. But you gotta remember to pay back a kindness. Thinking of Zhang Yi helping him out twice, Uncle Yu slapped his thigh. If it wasn't for Zhang Yi, I never would have thought to stockpile supplies, and I wouldn't be here today. Yu Jiguang, gotta find a way to repay him. Just then, Xia Mei spoke quietly. You know, I don't think you need to be so grateful to Zhang Yi. Looks to me like he's keeping you at arm's length, right? Uncle Yu looked surprised. What are you talking about? Xia Mei sounded weak. Think about it. If he really trusted you, he would have opened the door when we went by, let us come in and sit down. Instead, he just tossed the medicine out the window without even showing his face. Doesn't that tell you something? Uncle Yu was annoyed. Don't talk crazy. The guy's got good intentions. What's wrong with you? Xia Mei didn't back down. She kept her voice low. I'm just saying, he helped you, but it didn't cost him much. Maybe he just did you a small favor on purpose, hoping you'd be his muscle someday. If he's such a great guy, how come he used those nasty methods to kill dozens of neighbors? Unless he's willing to let us live in his house, I don't buy that he's such a good man. Besides, his house is huge, what's 3 more people gonna do? It's not like. Before Xia Mei could say another word, Uncle Yu roared. Enough. Uncle Yu's face was red as he glared at her, scaring Xia Mei. the baby in her arms started crying. Xia Li quickly hugged the baby and soothed her. "I'm sorry, I was wrong. I'm only saying this stuff for your own good. In times like these, you can't be too careful." Uncle Yu said coldly, "Don't you ever say things like that again. You Jiguang, know the difference between right and wrong. If I start doubting someone who's helped me, I'm not worth spit." Uncle Yu was honest and straightforward, but straightforward wasn't the same as stupid. Okay, so maybe Zhang Yi did help him for a reason. Big deal, in this world, nobody does something for nothing. He'd lived over 40 years, worked as a security guard for more than 10, and he'd seen it all. He wasn't dumb. Xia Li knew Uncle Yu was angry, and that she couldn't push it any further, so she shut her mouth, but that didn't mean she was giving up on swaying Uncle Yu. Living in Zhang Yi's warm house was her dream. Xia Li looked down at her 8-month-old baby and made a secret vow. "Baby, I don't care what we have to do to survive." That night, the white moonlight illuminated the snowy landscape, creating an eerie, lonely scene. The heavy snow had been falling for almost a month. Sometimes it was heavier, sometimes lighter, but it never stopped. The snow in Yuelu community was piled up to the 4th story, covering everything in white. Out of habit, most people were already asleep. The entrance to the ground floor of Building 25 was completely blocked by tons of snow, sealing it tight. Suddenly, the snow near the entrance seemed to loosen, and a few pieces of ice fell to the ground. Then, a large chunk of ice and snow bulged out and was pushed outward. A shovel emerged from the hole. Soon after, the hole was widened, and a group of a dozen people wearing heavy clothes and carrying shovels, steel bars, and axes crawled out. The leader was short and skinny, with sunken cheeks, but he had a pair of sharp eyes that could make your blood run cold. Once they were in the hallway, he whispered, "Let's go, upstairs." The group carefully picked up their equipment and headed up the stairs. They were organized, with people in front carrying planks and pans as shields. On the 10th floor, they ran into a resident sneaking down to collect snow at night. Without a word, a burly man swung his shovel, hitting him in the head. Thwack, blood splattered everywhere, and the man collapsed without even a scream. The big man looked at the body on the ground and said to the skinny man leading them, "Second uncle, what do we do?" Second uncle said, "Leave him for now. We'll pick him up later." The group followed his orders and kept climbing. Their target was apartment 2401 in Building 25. Zhang Yi was sound asleep, and Zhou Kur was locked in the spare bedroom next door. The intruders reached the 24th floor without making a sound. They were clearly afraid of heights, but they didn't seem winded at all. These weren't ordinary folks. They must have been professionals. The group crept to the door of Zhang Yi's apartment, but no one reached out to knock. The man called second uncle held up his hand to stop everyone. He called out softly, "Old donkey, get over here." A middle-aged man in a gray wool cap came forward. He was carrying a gray backpack. "Open the door." Second uncle pointed to Zhang Yi's door. The old donkey nodded. "Watch this." He walked up to Zhang Yi's door, put down his backpack, and quickly pulled out various tools. The most noticeable were the detonators, and several rectangular objects wrapped in yellow tape. After a few minutes of fiddling, everyone scrambled back into the hallway. Boom. A deafening explosion shook the entire building. Everyone was jolted awake. Zhang Yi was no exception. Since the explosion happened right outside his door, his ears were ringing, and his eardrums were throbbing. Chapter 75: The Power of White Phosphorus. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Yi reacted fast. He leaped out of bed in his pajamas, instantly pulled his pistol from his pocket dimension, flicked off the safety, and gripped it tight. He fired up his phone and checked the security feed outside. The living room was undisturbed. In her room, Zhou Kur was huddled in a corner, a terrified mess wrapped in her quilt, head buried in her arms. Finding nothing amiss inside, Zhang Yi let out a breath. Then he checked the monitor showing the outside again, and that's when he spotted them, a dozen or so figures creeping around. Most were armed with shovels, crowbars, planks, even axes. Something about the boards caught his eye. Zooming in, he saw they were the red 3-ply boards common at construction sites. Zhang Yi was certain there wasn't any construction happening in their building, but at number 26 next door, a crew was working on a nearby project. The company had rented a house for about 20 of them. As the smoke cleared, they rushed to the door, checking to see if the blast had worked. These guys were clearly prepared, focused. They were coming for Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi's eyes turned cold. Word about his supplies must have gotten out. Outside, the second uncle and his crew were stunned by the undamaged steel door. "Hey, old donkey, what kind of garbage are you using? Couldn't blow a door open with that crap?" One of the workers angrily questioned the old donkey. The old donkey was just as surprised. "That's not right. My mix is usually fine. Maybe it got damp." The old donkey fancied himself a demolition expert on the construction crew, but his methods were homemade, so even though his explosives were loud, they were a far cry from the power of professionally made stuff. Otherwise, even if they couldn't blow the door in, they would have at least cracked the walls. In short, more noise than impact. Zhang Yi exhaled, relieved that his place wasn't damaged. But a burning anger ignited inside him. These guys were trying to kill him. Time to give them a taste of their own medicine. The crew outside was still bickering, some already trying to smash the door with shovels. They didn't notice the small firing port cut into the steel door above their heads. Zhang Yi lit a Molotov cocktail and tossed it out. Flames erupted instantly. Still seething, Zhang Yi grabbed a few small white vials from his space. They contained an almost clear white liquid, white phosphorus dissolved in sulfur dioxide, a crude white phosphorus incendiary. White phosphorus is basically hellfire in a bottle. Burning at over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, it obliterates everything in its range. The explosions create intense light and scatter burning fragments, which are nearly impossible to remove quickly once they stick to the skin. Its use is banned internationally, but Zhang Yi didn't give a damn about that. Anything to kill the enemy was fair game. The Molotov cocktail spread fire on the ground, but its killing power wasn't all that impressive. These guys had trudged through snow, their clothes soaked. It wouldn't catch fire easily, but the burning bottle created a patch of flame on the ground, rapidly evaporating the sulfur dioxide, causing the dissolved white phosphorus to ignite. In an instant, a superheated zone of thousands of degrees formed in the air. The flames splashed onto their clothes, and they couldn't put it out. The hallway outside turned into an inferno. Zhang Yi's counterattack caught them completely off guard. They didn't have time to react. Many were instantly consumed by the clinging white phosphorus flames. Their down jackets and cotton coats became perfect fuel. Help me, somebody help me!" The screams echoing in the hallway sounded like they came from hell. To be burned alive like that had to be one of the most agonizing ways to die. Even a match burning your finger is painful. Imagine every inch of your skin consumed by flames. Still not satisfied, Zhang Yi grabbed his pistol and started firing wildly. Bang! 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 He didn't care about saving bullets, just kept pulling the trigger. One body after another dropped. Of the dozen or so attackers, 8 were dead. Only 5 or 6 managed to escape. Zhang Yi didn't chase after them. Safety first. Once he was sure the attackers were dead, he sealed up the firing ports and activated the air filtration system to keep the smoke out. Zhang Yi looked at the empty gun in his hand and shook his head. "This thing is useless. Good thing I didn't buy a machine gun, or I would have blown through hundreds of rounds in one burst." He needed to find a way to get his hands on some serious firepower. Until now, his sense of urgency hadn't been so high, but today, those workers with their explosives had given him a wake-up call. In the apocalypse, survival wasn't easy. Everyone he'd face from now on would be a ruthless survivor. What if one day, a demolition expert showed up with enough explosives to bring down his whole building? Of course, that was an exaggeration. That kind of power isn't something ordinary people can get their hands on. Still, Zhang Yi had to start planning for the future. That pack of dogs. "I'm going to kill them all." Zhang Yi cursed. He walked to Zhou Ke's room and opened the door. Zhou Ke was still huddled in the corner, her head buried between her legs. "It's okay," Zhang Yi said. Hearing Zhang Yi's voice, Zhou Ke felt a sudden rush of relief. Even if he was overly cautious and usually indifferent, right now, he was the only warmth in Zhou Ke's life. She looked up at Zhang Yi and stammered, "I wasn't scared. I just thought it was an earthquake, and it was safer to hide in the corner." Zhang Yi chuckled. "On the 24th floor. If there's an earthquake, you're toast no matter where you hide." Zhou Ke stood up and asked, "What happened?" Zhang Yi sat on her bed before Zhou Ke had moved in. This place had been barren. The bed didn't even have a blanket, but now it felt warmer. Pink velvet quilt, yellow sheets, her black lace underwear and stockings hung on the window sill. She was a delicate woman, and not just her own room. She cleaned the entire apartment every day, including Zhang Yi's bedroom. Zhang Yi thought to himself, "It's great to have a sensible woman around. If it wasn't the end of the world, a woman like this would cost you a fortune just in dowry." Chapter 76 The Tianhe Gang in Building 26. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Yi filled Zhou Ke in on the recent events. "Those workers from number 26 next door are behind this. With that new development nearby, tons of construction workers are renting around here." Zhou Ke was surprised. "But our building's pretty upscale. Are they really dropping that kind of cash?" Zhang Yi explained, "They're cramming 10 to a room. It's not exactly breaking the bank." Zhou Ke owed and nodded, then her expression turned serious. "So, they're even more dangerous than Chen Zhenghao." Zhang Yi agreed. Chen Zhenghao was just a local punk. Back in the good old days, people wouldn't dare mess with him, so they were scared of him. But now, everyone's on edge. If he didn't have a gun, he'd be worm food by now. These workers are a different story. They do manual labor all day. They're way stronger than regular folks, and they're tough as nails. Plus, they all know each other, and there's so many of them. They can get away with anything." Zhang Yi took a deep breath and sighed, "Thank God I took out that explosive-loving fat guy yesterday. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night otherwise." Zhou Ke asked, "What's our next move? Are we going to get revenge on them?" Zhang Yi raised an eyebrow. "Of course, I want revenge. But there's no way I'm going over there. Going into their turf would be dumb. Look at it this way, didn't I wipe out more than half of them already?" Zhou Ke said, "Yeah, but you had a gun." "Even with a gun, it's not worth it," Zhang Yi said confidently. "Even if I wiped them all out, the moment I have to pick up a shovel, I'd feel like I've lost a lot." Zhou Ke rolled her eyes. "You're so stubborn, and cautious. But if you're not going after them, how are you going to get revenge? They seem fearless, like they've got nothing to lose. After all, who in their right mind would be playing with explosives in an apartment building? One wrong move, and you're burying yourself." Zhang Yi rubbed his chin, already hatching a plan. "Looks like if we want any peace and quiet around here, we're going to need some cannon fodder." He grabbed his phone and opened the building's group chat for 25 hashtag. The neighbors had been jolted awake by the explosion, and the group was blowing up. What was that noise? Earthquake? Bomb? It sounded like it came from upstairs. Meteorite strike, maybe? Could be. How else would you explain that weird temperature change? We're probably all going extinct like the dinosaurs. It was a complete mess. People were saying anything. Zhang Yi chimed in. That bunch of workers from number 26 broke into our building, trying to rob supplies and kill people. I caught them in time and drove them off. Zhang Meng from the 16th floor is dead. The noise was them using explosives. The neighbors immediately freaked out. What? We just got rid of Chen Zhenghao, and now these dirt kickers from next door are coming after us. They're ruthless. I hear there are constantly fights breaking out over at that construction site. How did they even get in here from 26 hashtag? Zhang Yi said. They dug a tunnel through the snow from below and came up through the first floor. Someone immediately panicked. Seal up that tunnel, quick. And lock the door. Zhang Yi responded, it's useless. Those doors will break if you cough at them. Even if you block the tunnel, they can climb in through the fourth-floor windows. The neighbors were terrified. If Zhang Yi hadn't stopped them, they might have broken into their homes and killed them. What can we do? We can't fight those guys. Half the people in our building are already dead, and most of the rest are elderly, women, and kids. That wasn't wrong. Most of the able-bodied people had died near Zhang Yi's place. Then someone said, "Good thing we have Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi, you're so strong. You drove off so many of them all by yourself. With you here, we're safe. Zhang Yi, you're our hero." That the others jumped on the bandwagon. Zhang Yi was now the building's strongest fighter, and he had a gun. Having him deal with the workers next door was the obvious choice. Zhang Yi found it pretty amusing. They used to trash him in the group chat every day, calling him selfish and shameless. Most of their people died because of Zhang Yi, and they hated his guts. Now they were begging for his help and calling him a hero. Did they really think he was that stupid? Zhang Yi just smirked. "I used up a lot of ammo fighting them. I can barely protect myself. Let's just hope for the best." No way, why should I protect you? I couldn't care less if you live or die. After saying that, Zhang Yi went silent. The people in the group went crazy, begging Zhang Yi to protect them. "Zhang Yi, you can't just let us die. If we're all dead, it'll just be you two left. Won't you be lonely? If we all die, you'll become a target. There's no telling how many people are going to be eyeing you." Zhang Yi's eyes turned cold. They were right about one thing. People were watching him. The video he'd sent to the group had probably been shared all over the place. Outsiders would just be jealous, but the people in the nearby buildings had a chance to come to 25 hashtag and take everything from him. He still didn't say anything. Then, Uncle Yu sent Zhang Yi a private message, asking if he needed any help. "I know those bastards at 26 hashtag. I even had a drink with them once. Those dogs actually came after you. I won't let them get away with this. Zhang Yi, if you have a plan, just tell me. I'll take care of them for you." Zhang Yi smiled. "Uncle Yu, there's quite a few of them, right?" Uncle Yu said, "Yeah, there used to be over 30. But a dozen or so died recently, so there's around 20 left. I know their boss, Huang Tianfang. We used to chat. But they're a nasty bunch. They've killed a lot of people over in 26 hashtag. I want nothing to do with those guys." Uncle Yu and the workers were both from the countryside, but the workers were thugs. While Uncle Yu had spent years in the army, they weren't on the same level. Chapter 77. Zhang Yi, I will kill your neighbor if you don hashtag 039, come out. You are listening at novelfull.audio. According to Uncle Yu, Zhang Yi had a basic understanding of these guys. They were workers operating under the name of an engineering firm, Tianhe Group. Technically, they were contract workers, not official employees. To save face, they liked to pretend they worked directly for Tianhe. Now, they called themselves the Tianhe Gang, and their leader was Huang Tianfang, that skinny little dude. "Zhang Yi, you got a plan for dealing with them? Need any help, just say the word," Uncle Yu offered. Zhang Yi gave a faint smile. He wasn't about to go head-to-head with this so-called Tianhe Gang. His best bet was to stay inside his fortified apartment. Stepping outside meant facing that number 20 guy, and even with a gun, it was too risky. "Uncle Yu, better safe than sorry. I'm not looking for revenge just yet. Truth is, it's just me, and even with you, the odds aren't great." His eyes flickered. "Unless we could get all the neighbors in the building on board." Uncle Yu got what Zhang Yi was saying. "You mean, like Huang Tianfang and his crew, we all band together and speak with one voice?" "Exactly." Uncle Yu responded, "All right, I'll float the idea in the group chat. See who's interested." Zhang Yi smiled. "No need to rush it, Uncle Yu. If you push them too hard, they'll think you have an ulterior motive, and you'll just get your head bitten off." Uncle Yu asked, "So what should we do?" Zhang Yi chuckled. "No need to rush things. We've got plenty of supplies. Just wait it out. The Tianhe Gang hit us once, they'll be back. Especially after I offed so many of them, they'll want payback. When that happens, the neighbors will be begging for our help. Uncle Yu couldn't help but sigh, Zhang Yi, you're one sharp cookie. They were on the same page, agreeing to ignore the Tianhe gang for now. Back in the building's group chat, the neighbors were hinting that Zhang Yi and Uncle Yu should take the lead in wiping out the Tianhe gang. They were experts at moral blackmail. They praised Zhang Yi and Uncle Yu, calling them good guys, which, Zhang Yi thought, was more like a curse. You're a good guy, yeah, right. Then they'd make excuses. They were out of food, too weak to fight. Or they'd pull the I'm old or I'm a woman card to get out of it. Zhang Yi knew these shameless neighbors all too well, so he ignored them. They'd learn their lesson soon enough. Over the next couple of days, Zhang Yi started gathering intel from the outside world. He couldn't ask directly, of course. Too many people were nosy about his supplies, and any information they gave him would probably be bogus. Instead, he asked Zhou Kur and Uncle Yu to do some digging. One was a doctor, the other a security guard. They both had wide networks. Zhang Yi wanted to know who in the 30 buildings of Yuelu community posed a threat. It wasn't hard to find out who had killed the most people, who was the toughest now. All it took was asking around. Zhou Kur eagerly grabbed a pen and paper and helped Zhang Yi put together a chart. Zhang Yi took a look. It gave a general overview of the different groups' sizes and weapons. Reading it, he felt a lot more at ease. Yuelu community was supposed to be upscale, so there weren't that many truly bad people around. According to Zhou Kur and Uncle Yu, the two most concerning groups were, first, the Tianhe gang in Building 26 next door. They were mostly made up of the small construction crew under the Tianhe group, and they were pretty tough. Their weapons were mostly shovels and steel bars. No guns. The bomb they used against Zhang Yi last time was made by a demolition guy from their company, and it wasn't that powerful. And Zhang Yi had already burned that guy to a crisp, so there was no way they could make more. Still, who knows if they have any in storage. Gotta be careful. Find an excuse to send some cannon fodder to use up their reserves. Zhang Yi thought to himself. Besides the Tianhe gang, there was another faction that caught his attention. In Building 21, there was a group of young punks calling themselves the Crazy Wolf Gang. The name was ridiculously cheesy, but they were surprisingly effective fighters. Zhou Kur found out they were students and some layabouts, mostly in their 20s. A group of a dozen or so. The leaders were Wang Chang and Xiao Lu. Zhang Yi knew them both. They were well-known street hustlers in Yuelu community. They coasted off their parents after graduating from some no-name college. Not exactly rich, but definitely middle class. They wouldn't get a job and just stayed home. After a while, they hooked up with some shady people. Before, they wouldn't have been fit to lick Chen Zhenghao's boots, but there weren't any ruthless guys like Zhang Yi in their building, so they were able to build a following. For Zhang Yi, only these two groups posed a real threat. In some buildings, there were only a dozen households left. Many people couldn't handle the apocalypse, lost it and offed themselves, or they killed each other over dwindling supplies and died like dogs. Zhang Yi felt more confident now. He told Zhou Kur, keep gathering intel. We need to know everything, minimize the risk. Especially if they have guns. That's crucial. Zhou Kur nodded obediently, then picked up her phone and kept digging. In the following days, Zhang Yi and Uncle Yu agreed to stay put, never leave the apartment. The Tianhe gang hated Zhang Yi for the beating they'd taken. 8 of their boys gone for good, and the rest badly burned. 2 died from their injuries that very night. The Tianhe gang had never taken a loss like that. They swore they'd raid Building 25 and kill Zhang Yi to avenge their brothers. But then something changed. They hated Zhang Yi the most, but they also feared him the most. Seeing what Zhang Yi could do, and knowing his place was hard to crack, they were too scared to hit him directly. So what to do? Go after Zhang Yi's neighbors. Huang Tianfang figured, if I can't kill Zhang Yi, can't I kill his neighbors? Wouldn't he feel guilty seeing his neighbors die? How could he face their accusations? Killing his neighbors would be the ultimate revenge. Huang Tianfang was being delusional, figuring he should pick the low-hanging fruit, so over the next few days, he brought his crew back and raided several apartments. After killing the occupants, they wrote in blood in the hallway. Zhang Yi, come out or we kill all your neighbors. Chapter 78. The neighbors seek protection. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Huang Tianfang thought he was slick, so he started killing people in Building 25 to smoke Zhang Yi out. In a feel-good movie, the hero would be all over that, ready to negotiate, but Zhang Yi? He was happy about it. No guilt whatsoever. His plan was for Huang Tianfang to keep bumping off neighbors and spreading panic until they begged him for help, and sure enough, after a couple of days, the neighbors cracked. They saw Huang Tianfang's threats scrawled in blood, and decided their only hope was for Zhang Yi to confront him. Cue the non-stop barrage in the group chat, the private messages, the voice calls. Zhang Yi opened the chat and scanned their reactions. Zhang Yi, you gotta fix this. You attracted the Tianhe gang, and now we're paying the price. Yeah, you made the mess, you clean it up. Don't drag us down with you. They said they'll keep killing people until you come out. Zhang Yi, if you have a shred of decency, you'll handle this. Are you really okay with watching us all die because of you? Zhang Yi just grinned at their messages. He wasn't surprised. He knew how these people operated. He tossed a few lines into the group. I didn't ask them to come. They came to kill me, I killed them back. So, how's that my fault? You can't handle them yourselves. Not my problem. Besides, you all said those guys are too dangerous. Guess I'll just stay put where it's safe. Heh heh. He even threw in a smiley face emoji that really set the neighbors off. Zhang Yi, you're safe, but what about us? Are you just gonna let us die? You brought this on us. Do you even have a conscience? Zhang Yi just laughed. He knew how shameless they were. He scoffed. What you do is none of my business. Why should I care if you die? Don't even talk to me about conscience. You all came after me, remember? I could have come to each of your doors with a gun and wiped you out one by one. You should be thanking me for being generous instead of whining about conscience. He added darkly, you really think I wouldn't? That shut them up real quick. They remembered Zhang Yi wasn't someone to push around. Remember Qin Zhenghao? Frozen into an ice cube and then smashed to bits. That was Zhang Yi's handiwork. Zhang Yi stopped typing and sent a message to Uncle Yu. Uncle Yu, time for you to shine. Uncle Yu replied, don't worry, I got this. Back in the owner group, the neighbors were reeling from Zhang Yi's dressing down. Their guilt trip had failed, negotiations were off, and they were still facing the threat of the Tianhe gang barging in and killing them. Most of the men in Building 25 were either dead or injured. Zhang Yi and Uncle Yu were the only ones left who could fight. What do we do? We thought getting rid of Qin Zhenghao would save us. But these guys from the Tianhe gang are even worse. Qin Zhenghao killed to build his reputation and get supplies. Huang Tianfang and his crew were out for revenge. They killed anyone they could get their hands on. Are we really just waiting to die? Damn it, how did things get this bad? Is this what the future looks like, some kind of twisted free-for-all? This snow isn't going anywhere. We're all gonna get buried alive. Despair set in. They figured they only had a few days left. Then, Uncle Yu, usually so quiet and unassuming, spoke up. Hey, everyone, don't panic. There are only about 20 guys in the Tianhe gang. If we stick together, we can take them. Uncle Yu's words gave them a glimmer of hope. The old handyman always seemed so down-to-earth and dependable. Uncle Yu, thank God you're here. You've been quiet lately, I thought you were a goner too. Great. With Uncle Yu on our side, we're safe. Uncle Yu, just tell us what to do. We'll back you up. Uncle Yu read the messages, his eyelids twitching, fully back him up. Meaning they wanted him to take the lead while they watched from the sidelines. He was speechless. Uncle Yu said, hey, relying on me alone won't cut it. My family's supplies are running low too. We haven't eaten in days, and we're weak. You're all probably in the same boat. How can we fight the Tianhe gang like this? Some of the neighbors fell silent. Some of them have been doing okay for food lately, eating barbecue. When your mind is numb, that stuff starts tasting pretty good. Uncle Yu, what are we supposed to do then? We're all running out of food. We can't help you, that they'd been so quick to offer their full support earlier, but now they were suddenly reluctant to share. If you have any ideas, please speak up. We're all ears. Back to being so polite again, Uncle Yu said, if our building is going to stand a chance against the others, we need Zhang Yi. He's got weapons, food, and strength to spare. He's the perfect guy to lead us. That everyone stared in disbelief. They had just given Zhang Yi the cold shoulder, and now they wanted him to lead them. Was that even possible? But Zhang Yi just told us to fend for ourselves. He's not leaving his place, and we can't talk him into it. Still, if he could lead us, that would be amazing. As much as they hated Zhang Yi, they had to admit he was powerful. He had wiped out half the people in the building, and Qin Zhenghao turned into crushed ice. Courtesy of Zhang Yi, Uncle Yu said, well, Zhang Yi and I are still on good terms. I'll go talk to him and see if I can get him to come out. The neighbors quickly replied, Uncle Yu, we're counting on you. Chapter 79. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Yi was watching the group chat unfold. Suddenly, Uncle Yu sent him a private message. Zhang Yi, what's the play here? What should we do? Zhang Yi replied, timing's everything. When the moment's right, back me up. We need to get this group listening. Show them some carrot and stick. Get them in line, and our building will be safe. At least, I will be. He figured a lot of these neighbors would end up as cannon fodder, and many had lost family because of him. Given half a chance, they'd retaliate, so, better to nip that in the bud. Once he and Uncle Yu were on the same page, Uncle Yu went back to the group chat, putting on an act. At Zhang Yi, we're counting on you, man. This place would be a ghost town without you, right? So, do us all a solid. Help us out, and we'll be eternally grateful. That the other neighbors jumped on the bandwagon. Yeah, save us, and we're yours to command. From now on, you call the shots. Zhang Yi, our family's lives are in your hands. Empty words flooded the chat. Zhang Yi just smirked. I'm only humoring you because of Uncle Yu. Honestly, I could care less. I'm doing fine on my own. Why should I risk my neck for you guys? It's hard enough out there as it is, fighting for every scrap. Not worth it. The more he played hard to get, the more desperate the neighbors became. Zhang Yi, no way. We'll do whatever you say, promise. That even in a tight spot, anyone would cling to any glimmer of hope. Zhang Yi's smirk widened. Oh really? Anything I say? You're all in? Hesitation rippled through the group. Finally, someone chimed in, as long as it doesn't mean certain death, we're game. Zhang Yi pounced. So, if I told you to grab your weapons and fight the Tianhe gang to the last man, you'd do it? Well. Silence descended. Everyone waited for someone else to break the ice. Zhang Yi burst out laughing. You want me to risk my neck? Fine, then I'm out. When Huan Tianfang comes knocking, just stick your necks out and take what's coming to you. Peace out. Uncle Yu panicked. Zhang Yi, hold on. We'll listen, we swear. We're already dead men walking. If we fight, we've got a shot. I'm in. Then he leaned on the others. What are you waiting for? We fight together, we live. We wait, we die, one by one. Uncle Yu's pep talk worked. The thought of a chance at survival loosened tongues, and they began to agree to follow Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi and Uncle Yu worked as a duo, securing control of the entire building. He spoke, his voice even. Good. From now on, you follow my orders. No slack, no hesitation. If you don't get in line, you're betraying everyone in this building. And I will deal with you. Zhang Yi scanned the member list. Don't think you can hide in the shadows while we fight your battles. If I find you, you're done. No freeloading. Zhang Yi said this because he'd noticed only about 20 people actively participating. The rest were playing possum, hoping to sit back and let Zhang Yi do the dirty work. Zhang Yi's words hit a nerve with those who'd agreed to fight. Fang Lin, come out. I know you're alive. I saw you shoveling snow yesterday. Lianhua, where are you hiding? Don't pretend you didn't see the messages. We'll find you. Driven by fear and resentment, the neighbors called out the slackers. People are selfish. If they're risking their lives, they don't want anyone hiding in the bunker. Cornered, the hidden neighbors emerged. Oh, I just woke up and saw the message. Hey, what's up? We're fighting back. Awesome. I'm not afraid of death, I just didn't see anything. A chorus of guilty excuses filled the chat. Zhang Yi didn't buy it. Bottom line, you elected me the building manager. You follow my orders. Anyone who drags their feet is a traitor and deserves what's coming to them. The owners were silenced, knowing Zhang Yi wasn't bluffing. The 50-plus bodies were a bloody reminder. Having wielded the stick, Zhang Yi decided to dangle a carrot. Don't worry, I'm a reasonable guy. I can't stand seeing you starve. If you play ball, I'll risk my neck and find supplies. He had this planned for a while now. If engineering teams are using blasting technology, stronger enemies would inevitably appear in the future. He lived on the 24th floor, and while the whole place was metal, a collapse downstairs could affect him. That's why he wanted to raise a group of cannon fodder to live below him, guard him, and be expendable. He'd need to support them with supplies. Zhang Yi wasn't about to tap into his own stash, so he needed to find more. Besides, his weapons and ammunition were dwindling. He'd burned through 20 rounds in his first battle, so he needed to find more weapons and equipment. As for transport, that was easy. The snow outside was 10 meters thick, rendering vehicles useless. However, there was a special vehicle for snowmobiles. Zhang Yi had 5 of them in his space, 2 with cockpits, and 3 smaller ones. In a world buried in snow, leaving home was a monumental task, but he could move around the city with ease. The owner group was in an uproar. Zhang Yi, you'd go out for supplies? With all that snow? There's no way to drive. You'd walk. You'd freeze to death. Zhang Yi said, no matter how bad it is out there, for all of you, I have to try. Don't worry, I worked in warehousing for years. I know where the warehouses are, where the shopping malls and supermarkets are. Finding supplies will be no problem. Chapter 80 Snowmobile. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The neighbors acted like he was their personal savior. Even those ashamed of death, already tucked into their quilts and waiting for the end, now had a glint in their eyes. Zhang Yi, can you really go out and find supplies? If you can, we might just make it through this. Even though the city's shut down by the blizzard, we produced so much stuff over the decades, there's gotta be enough for us to survive. Zhang Yi, I'm just so touched. After how we treated you back then, and you still. Some of them choked up. Basically, everyone in their families had almost died at Zhang Yi's hands, but now, all their hatred seemed to have vanished, replaced by gratitude. Zhang Yi said solemnly, since I'm the building manager now, I'm responsible for everyone. Besides, my family's supplies are dwindling too. Going out is the only way we'll all survive. Hearing that, everyone felt a little more at ease. In these times, if you act like a saint, people just think you're a hypocrite, but if you've got your own needs, people understand that. It's been almost a month since the world went to hell. Plenty of folks had starved to death in the building, so everyone figured that no matter how much Zhang Yi had stashed away, it couldn't last forever, especially with 2 mouths to feed now. The neighbors showered Zhang Yi with gratitude, praising him like a god. Zhou Kur even joked, if you started a cult right now, you could be the leader. Disasters breed religion, people always need something to believe in. Zhang Yi smiled faintly, no need to make things complicated with a bunch of cannon fodder. I just need to dangle a moldy piece of bread, and they'll treat me better than their own fathers. Zhou Kur asked curiously, but do you really want to go out? There was a hint of worry and guilt in her eyes. Zhang Yi knew she thought his supplies were running low and felt like she was holding him back. He pinched her cheek, smiling. Don't worry, I've got enough to keep you fed. I'm just looking for the right chance to scout things out. Normally, Zhang Yi wouldn't dare to go out, afraid of being attacked by the crazed neighbors, but now, he was their only hope. so they weren't likely to turn on him. Zhou Ke nodded. Then I'll go with you. She knew Zhang Yi didn't completely trust her, so she volunteered. Zhang Yi looked her in the eye and slowly shook his head. After what we've become, you think I'd still doubt you? A woman's place is at home, waiting for her man to return. Zhang Yi stood up. Zhou Ke's eyes welled up with emotion, but it didn't last. Zhang Yi quickly stuffed all the remaining food and coal into his personal space. I trust you 100%, he said with a grin. Zhou Ke was speechless. She'd been touched just a moment ago, but now he was back to his old self. Zhang Yi ignored her sad expression and went to change. This was the first time he'd ventured out since the end of the world. The city was buried in snow, with no signs of life, so the risk was relatively low. Still, he put on a calfskin jacket for extra protection. Even a knife couldn't easily pierce that stuff. After thinking it over, he grabbed 2 frying pans from his space, placing one over his chest and the other over his back. That way, even a pistol wouldn't hit anything vital. Finally, he put on his winter clothes. He looked bulky, but he felt secure. Zhang Yi grabbed a 4-foot crowbar and tested its weight. In a fight, this heavy crowbar was more useful than a machete. A knife wound wouldn't immediately incapacitate someone, but a solid hit from this thing would drop them. Crowbar in hand, he loaded a magazine into his pistol and slipped it into his pocket. Fully armed, he left the apartment. It was freezing, and even in professional mountaineering gear, you could feel the chill, but the cold didn't bother Zhang Yi. A little exercise would warm him up. Gripping the crowbar, he carefully descended the stairs. He'd check his surroundings before heading out, always cautious. Nothing happened on the way down. Most people were too weak to cause trouble. Zhang Yi reached the 4th floor. After the Tianhe gang's actions, the residents had moved to the upper floors, leaving the lower levels abandoned. Zhang Yi pushed open a door. The place was a mess, the windows smashed, and even the weak security bars had been torn open. The wind howled through the building. Zhang Yi carefully climbed out through the opening. His feet sank into the snow up to his knees, but due to the weight of the snow, the ground underneath was pretty solid, and he didn't sink completely. Walking through it was still tough. Zhang Yi looked around. The vast Yuelu community was silent, filled only with the sound of wind. He didn't see anyone watching. Zhang Yi pulled a snowmobile from his personal space. He'd already filled it with gas. These things weren't complicated. Zhang Yi skimmed the manual and figured out how to operate it. He climbed on, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. Zhang Yi drove the snowmobile towards the edge of the community. As he left, he thought he saw people peering at him through windows. That wasn't unexpected. There were no signs of life outside, and the snowmobile was loud. Looks like someone's gonna get greedy for this snowmobile in the future. Zhang Yi sneered. He wasn't worried about the snowmobile attracting attention. Too many people were itching to screw him over anyway. He wouldn't be surprised if someone killed for a cookie. As Zhang Yi saw it, he was up to his neck in debt. The heavy snow had buried smaller buildings, and the streets were invisible. But having lived here for over 20 years, Zhang Yi could roughly navigate by the taller landmarks. Getting lost wouldn't be a problem. Chapter 81: The Arsenal of the Police Station. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The dead city of Tianhe. A vast blanket of white snow covered everything. From above, only the outlines of some skyscrapers were visible, the rest swallowed by the white expanse. Zhang Yi sped across the snow on a snowmobile. After nearly a month of self-isolation, this was his first time out for a ride. The wind whipped past his ears, and the feeling was incredible. Zhang Yi let out a few whoops. That the snowmobile's movement was hard to miss. As Zhang Yi drove, he caught glimpses of figures flickering behind the windows of some high-rises. Even in the apocalypse, some tenacious creatures, like humans, would survive. Like locusts, this extreme cold was like a pesticide, but after the disaster, the survivors would slowly adapt. Zhang Yi touched the gun in his pocket, feeling a surge of security. Every person alive in this city was a potential threat. In the apocalypse, you couldn't trust anyone. Zhang Yi's first stop wasn't the local supermarket. He steered his snowmobile straight for the Tianhe City Public Security Bureau. That's where the weapons stockpile would be. Zhang Yi kept one phrase in mind: all fears stem from a lack of firepower. So weapons, especially guns, were what he needed. After driving for over half an hour, Zhang Yi reached the Public Security Bureau. Most of it was submerged. The bottom 3 floors of the original 6-story building were completely gone. Luckily, the Public Security Bureau was a standalone building, and each floor was taller than a regular house. Otherwise, if Zhang Yi had arrived even 10 days later, there would have been nothing left. Zhang Yi parked the snowmobile in front of a 4th-floor window. He got out, pulled out a crowbar and smashed the window. Crash! Tempered glass shattered everywhere. Zhang Yi drew his gun and entered the building. It was dark inside, but that wasn't a problem. He pulled a miner's lamp from his personal storage space. The lamp, used by underground workers, was small but incredibly bright. When he turned it on, it was like a mini-sun, illuminating everything. Zhang Yi didn't know the layout of the police station, so he had to search room by room on the ice-covered 2nd floor. He pried open a locked door and was struck by what he found. Huddled in a corner were 7 or 8 police officers wrapped in thin blankets. Their bodies were paler than the snow. Zhang Yi took a deep breath, feeling a pang of sadness. They were all police officers on the night shift. When the blizzard hit, they didn't even have warm clothes. Judging by their appearance, they had frozen to death. Zhang Yi wanted to bury them, but then he thought that being buried in the ice and snow outside, in the place where they had dedicated so many years, might be a kind of fitting end. He bowed his head and observed a moment of silence for the city's protectors. Then he stepped around the bodies and continued his search. The police station was full of debris, so the search took time. When Zhang Yi got tired, he pulled out a piece of pure cocoa butter chocolate from his space, took a big bite, and kept going. It took nearly 2 hours before Zhang Yi found the gun storage, but it was locked. After struggling to pry it open, he smacked his forehead and went back to find the key. Luckily, he knew it would be in the duty room, and it wasn't hard to locate. Zhang Yi got the key and opened the door. The sight that greeted him was amazing. The arsenal was packed with firearms. Pistols, rifles, dozens of them in total. Zhang Yi even found a sniper rifle. He'd never seen these things before and couldn't name them or even use them, but Zhang Yi didn't care. He grabbed everything, figuring he could study it later, especially the sniper rifle. That was top tier. He'd be a sneaky player later on. Even if his aim wasn't perfect, he could still scare people. Zhang Yi thought he had a knack for shooting, considered himself a decent shot, especially with pistols. After being reborn, his mind was sharper, and his aim was even better. When they fought the Tianhe gang, almost every shot hit its mark. "I'm a gun genius," Zhang Yi grinned, half teasing himself. Then he found over 1,000 rounds of ammunition in the depot. There were also some old confiscated guns that had been stored for years, and there was no telling if they would fire. But Zhang Yi didn't hesitate and grabbed everything. He'd hit the jackpot. Besides the guns and ammo, Zhang Yi also found over a dozen pieces of body armor and a full set of riot gear, riot helmets, shields, and batons. This is enough to equip a seriously effective team in the future. Zhang Yi couldn't be happier. He took it all. Finding this stuff alone made the trip worthwhile. Zhang Yi had scored big at the police station, and it confirmed something: there were supplies out there. After all, it had snowed hard the night of December 12th. The next morning, people woke up to find over 3 feet of snow and sub-zero temperatures. Most people hadn't realized the world was ending or started hoarding supplies. By the time they realized something was wrong, it was too late to go out. Zhang Yi had found what he wanted and left the police station. A thick layer of snow had covered the snowmobile. Zhang Yi realized he'd been out for a long time. Time to get those pigs some slop. Thinking of his jerk neighbors, Zhang Yi spoke coldly. He turned and found a supermarket that hadn't been completely buried. He climbed in through a broken window, but the supermarket was almost empty, the shelves completely bare. There were some frozen, rotten vegetable leaves on the floor. Zhang Yi stroked his chin. This place is close to the residential area. It's a convenience store. No surprise, everything was cleaned out. But those big malls on the outskirts of town are untouched. Most new malls were far from residential areas because the land was too expensive. Zhang Yi worked in warehousing, so he knew which malls in Tianhe city were far from the crowds. He hopped on his snowmobile and headed for the economic development zone. A Wanda mall had been built there 2 years ago, and the nearest houses were 2 miles away, so the chance of it being emptied was slim.